The House will come to order. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. This is the Atkins motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce that the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File 2392, an act relating to liquor. Atkins moves that the conference report on Senate File 2392 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
I call the member from Dakota, Representative Atkins, to the Conference Committee report.
I forgot that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'd appreciate adoption of the Conference Committee report. There's very modest changes to the bill as it left the House floor. We did two things. We clarified some language relative to the wine educator provision, and then probably the most interesting piece in the bill, at least if you base that on the number of comments or questions that have come up, regarding the TCF Stadium, the provision of alcohol at TCF Stadium. We made one minor change there that would provide for at least a Minnesota brewed beer to be available in that beer garden, in addition to whatever other sorts of things that the university's Board of Regents might want to serve there. So in sum, Mr. Speaker, there is a bipartisan agreement on a stadium deal. Members, I'd appreciate your support for adoption of the Conference Committee report.
Is there any discussion of the Conference Committee report? Discussion. All those in favor of adopting the Conference Committee report signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 2392 as amended by conference.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have anything substantive to add. I just want to thank Representatives Anderson, Lilly, Hoppe, and Sanders for serving as conferees. This is an issue that's been lingering for several, I think 3 or 4 years now, Mr. Speaker, and with their help, it's nice to finally bring some resolution to it. Thank you, members. I appreciate your support.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Murphy M.
Mr. Speaker, are we supposed to have it?
Representative Murphy, I believe the Conference Committee report is being distributed as we speak. We will not, just as it is with amendments or bills, we will not take a vote until each member has had a chance to review the Conference Committee report. Further discussion? The member from Ramsey, Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I just want to speak in favor of this conference report and just want to thank again the Senate members and the House members of the Conference Committee and the body here for taking a position on the drinking at the Gopher Stadium. It's something that's been going on a couple of years, as Representative Atkins mentioned, and I think it's a great compromise, and I think it'll be a good solution to. And this being the People's House, it's kind of the same principle for there, and everybody should be able to partake in an adult beverage and enjoy themselves when they're at the Gopher Stadium. And hopefully, as Coach Kill's building up a wonderful new team, eventually we won't need alcohol at the stadium, perhaps.
Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Khan.
Well, Mr. Speaker and members, I certainly hope with expanded drinking there will clearly be expanded enforcement. None of you people may really care, but the parking for the stadium things goes through the neighborhoods in my district, neighborhoods where people care about things like drunk driving and things like that. So I certainly hope that some of the additional revenue will go into added enforcement.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 115 ayes and 13 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference. Its title is agreed to. Conference Committee report on House files.
Conference Committee report. This is the Garofalo motion, Mr. Speaker. Conference Committee report on House File 2949, an act relating to education. The reports addressed to the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File 2949, report that we agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all 5 conferees on the part of the House and all 5 conferees on the part of the Senate. Garofalo moves that the report of the Conference Committee in House File 2949 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
I call on the member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo, to explain the report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, the report was signed by all 10 conferees. I'll highlight some of the finer points of this legislation. First of all, Representative Detmer's Veterans Military Pay differential provision is in the bill. In addition, we were able to successfully hold on to the repeal of fund balances. Under current law, as strange as this may sound, we actually penalized school districts and told them they had to spend money, especially even if they wanted to save money for the future. This is particularly helpful to small school districts in rural areas who want to save up for a long-term project. That provision has been that's maintained in the bill. Representative Loon's bill regarding when a school employee, a teacher, is charged with a felony, to give the school district the option, give them the flexibility of being able to put those funds into escrow pending suspension and adjudication of the action. Currently, they're actually mandated to suspend them with pay. This is a very controversial situation that happens in school districts. We are successful in keeping that in the bill. This is something that the cities of the first class have actually had much more discretion on, and now we're able to take the other school districts in the state of Minnesota and rise them up and give them flexibility with this level. We were able to successfully reach a compromise on the basic skills test issue. You remember on the House floor, we had passed a provision to allow immersion schools. We were able to successfully reach a compromise so that every teacher in the state of Minnesota who has a one-year license, we're going to give them the opportunity, a one-year extension to pass that test. Representative Depke's lease levy provision is in there to give school districts more flexibility to save money. It has to be certified by the commissioner with regards to administrative space. We were also successful in expanding the post-secondary enrollment options program to 10th grades and to loosen up the prohibition on getting information to parents that was successfully included in the bill. Members, those are the higher points of the bill, and I would stand for any questions.
Discussion of the Conference Committee report. Discussion. Member from Ramsey, Representative Mariani.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll wait until after we adopt the report. I'm sorry.
All those in favor of adoption of the Conference Committee report signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2949, as amended by conference.
Third reading. Now the member from Ramsey, Representative Mariani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if Representative Garofalo can yield for a quick question or two.
He will yield, Representative Mariani.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Garofalo, I think you have a pretty good bill here, and I think we've got a bill that the governor, there's a number of good reasons why the governor should sign this bill. But I just want to be clear about a couple of things. One is, in the bill, maybe you could say a little bit more about the principals evaluation issue. And members, the reason I'm asking this question is that I think it's really important that the public understand that there is a broad meeting of the minds among legislators and the public relative to our ability to move forward with modern evaluation systems. And so I'm wondering if Representative Garofalo, you can just describe very quickly this particular provision. Members, if you could, please.
take your conversations to the alcove, or better yet, the retiring room, so that Representative Garofalo can hear Representative Mariani's question. The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the member from Ramsey. Currently in law, the teacher evaluation framework that is being designed by the Commissioner and that working group has a tie of 35% of it is tied to student achievement. This, in a corresponding fashion, has principals evaluation have that same requirement.
The member from Rams, Representative Mariani.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Garofalo, thank you. The other thing is there's a little issue here that hasn't gotten a lot of play, but I'm really glad to see that it's in this bill, but I want to make sure that it is. And that's the issue of a certain number of students who are still struggling to pass the BSTs. And because of the quirk of the timing of our laws over the last few years, these students, many of who are immigrant students who didn't start out in our education system, are going to have to, unless we act, they're going to have to pass a much tougher MCA test. And I believe that there's language here in the bill that says we're going to carve out for them the same thing that we're doing relative to students right now who we created a temporary exception, if you will, toward passing the MCA grad math test until such time as we develop a better way in which to test their competency with these tests. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that issue and just affirm for me that we are in fact carving out this one-time exception for this small group of students, again, many who are immigrant students who most likely are not going to be able to pass that MCA grad test.
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Representative Mariani, yes, Article 2, Section 4 on the bottom of page 24, you'll see the policy language that is consistent that you are carrying and supporting.
The member from Rams, Representative Mariani.
And Mr. Speaker and Representative Garofalo, just one final question relative to that issue. And you and I have served together here for a number of years, so you can probably understand a little bit of the sensitivity of why I would ask you this question. But does that provision indicate to the public in Minnesota that we're interested in backing off of high standards in terms of student outcomes in the state of Minnesota?
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Mariani, you are correct. This is a conversation that has taken place in the past and is one that will continue forward into the future. I thank you for the question.
The member from Rams, Representative Mariani.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Representative Garofalo, thank you for the acknowledgement and the non-answer, but let me answer for you. We are not backing off of high standards, and I do think, members, as we go into next year, as we continue to struggle and wrestle with how do we affirm and evaluate the outcomes of our K-12 students, that we don't get stuck on the one-dimensional approach of measuring their success solely by the use of one particular standardized test. The public is particularly sensitive on this issue. We do want to make sure we can use tests as a way to assess the knowledge that we're hoping, that we're desiring from our students. But frankly, we need a mature evaluation system in our state. I know that this particular provision does not answer that question, but I think it is illustrative of our need to be much more multidimensional, much more flexible, much more fair, quite frankly, to our students, understanding that there may be different circumstances that could arise where some students simply don't do well in tests, period. That doesn't mean that they're not competent. And so I want to challenge us on the policy front to continue to push forward a much more well-rounded approach to assessing our student outcomes in the state of Minnesota, particularly when we're attaching high-stakes outcomes, such as whether or not they're going to receive a high school diploma or not. But Representative Garofalo, Representative Erickson, good bill. I applaud you, and I'll be voting for this bill.
Discussion. The member from Nicollet, Representative Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Garofalo yield to a question?
He will yield, Representative Morrow.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Garofalo, I just am asking this to clarify on page 11, section 14, of the bill concerning the 10th grade PSEO when it comes to career and tech. And there's a requirement in that provision, Representative Garofalo, that a student must apply to a public institution for a career or tech course and be refused before they can turn to a private. My question is, when you wrote this, was the presumption that private nonprofits don't offer career and tech courses?
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the gentleman from Nicollet County. Right? I did not write the legislation, Representative Morrow, so I cannot attest to that. I think the intent of the legislation was to expand it to 10th grade. With regards to that provision, I do not believe there was a change in current statute pertaining to that.
The member from Nicollet. Nope. All right, discussion. The member from Blue Earth, Representative Breinert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought you were going to call on Representative Ward, so I was about to sit down. But generally, this bill, I think, has come back to us much better than it left in terms of some very reasonable compromises. But I still have a couple of areas of concern. One is the PSEO, and I'd be fine if Representative Garofalo might comment on it, or Representative Erdahl, or neither. But I'll just state my concern. My concern is with the counseling element. When we talked about this in committee, when we're moving down to the 10th grade, there's two pieces to this. Moving to the 10th grade PSEO options, and I like the way in which we've done this in terms of the qualifications. But my concern is that students would be appropriately counseled about whether this is a good choice for them. And I think the fact that post-secondary institutions will be coming in and advertising might make the motivation more about free college credits and less about the academic well-being of the student. So I'm very concerned about an explicit lack of relationship between K-12 counselors and the post-secondary advisors who would be involved in helping students make these decisions. So that's one area of concern. My second area of concern is with the 35% measure and the principal evaluation. And my main reason for being concerned there is we gave a group the task of presenting us with an evaluation proposal, and that 35% was not a part of it. And I think it's the work that they did, I think, deserves more respect than to counter such a major component of the plan. So those are my two main concerns.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, Representative Garofalo, I want to thank you for including the one-year extension on the MTLE. There are 1,500 educators in the state of Minnesota, 400 current and about 1,100 future educators that are struggling with passage of the MTLE, the Minnesota Teacher Licensure Exam. And members, you know, that's with the Board of Teaching, and we want to make sure that we have highly qualified and trained and the best educators that we can put in front of our children. But there are some problems with this MTLE, and you know, and we need to work with the Board of Teaching in order to evaluate that over the next year. And this allows us, Representative Garofalo and conference committee members, the opportunity to work on that and then keep the current educators that are maybe struggling a little bit with passing that exam, you know, in the classroom. The 400 that are in there, I have a constituent that is a highly qualified, motivated, inspiring kind of educator that will really make a difference in the lives of our children. And for that art teacher to be not in education would be a shame. Would be a shame. So we need to work on with the Board of Teaching on correcting the MTLE problems, and provision in this allows that. So Representative Garofalo and conference committee members, thank you for doing that, and I'm going to support this bill. Thank you, members.
The member from Meeker, Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I think there were some improvements made to this bill from when we saw it last. Also, a couple things that I may have some questions or concerns about, and just would appreciate it if Representative Garofalo would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Garofalo, one of my concerns with this bill, dealt with increasing collaboration between our secondary schools and our post-secondary schools in vocational education. I had a task force that was in here. Could you explain to me, please, what happened to the task force?
Member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker, and to my friend from Meeker, as you know, in the conference committee process, there are things that are added and removed, sides on different positions on issues, and ultimately there was some opposition to an additional task force, and regrettably that was one of the things that I had to drop from the bill.
The member from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and in particular, Representative Breinert, I wanted to address your concerns about the inclusion of the 35% for principals in their evaluation. You are correct. The principals did submit to us a report, a recommendation. I really believe that we accepted that because we did not send back to them anything other than an acknowledgement we'd received it. But when 9 of the conferees want something in a conference committee report, as does the commissioner, I was overruled. So my concession was that it's longitudinal data, so it will be tracking of the growth of students, and I believe that most principals are already doing that. So with that, I gave in and allowed the 35% to proceed. Hopefully this will be something that will be a valuable tool, but I wanted to explain to you the process. Thank you, Representative Breinert.
Further discussion. The member from Dakota, the author of the bill, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to give a couple thank yous. First of all, I want to thank the Commissioner of Education, Commissioner Cassellius, for her work on this. It was a very smooth-running process. We got some good stuff done. I also would like to thank Greg Crow and Tim Strom, as always, fantastic resources to help assist with the conferees, as well as all 5 of the conferees in the House for their work. Also, Rebecca Peichel and Jody Withers for their long hours they put into this. And all the members of the Education Finance Committee this year and last year, I greatly appreciated the opportunity and the honor to serve and work with you, and it's something that I'll always remember. And finally, credit goes to Senator Olson. This is her final conference committee after 30 years of legislative service, and I think this bill, we can show respect for her by putting up a lot of green votes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 119 ayes and 9 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference. Its title is agreed to. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. This is the Hancock motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File 1750. Conference Committee report on Senate File 1750, an act relating to natural resources. The report is addressed to the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate, the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File 1750, report that we have agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all 3 conferees on the part of the Senate and all 3 conferees on the part of the House. Hancock moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File 1750 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
Call the member from Beltrami, Representative Hancock, to explain the report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is the lands bill that we passed not long ago off the floor. There are no changes at all in the components of the bill. We did adopt the Senate language referring it to as the exchange of land of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area for federal lands, and drop the title of the Children's State Forest. We felt that it wasn't just forest lands, but it was really lands with minerals and other valuable assets. It does also state in there that we will preserve the spectacular wild areas while producing economic benefit for the Minnesota public schools. We did include in the bill our priorities for specific tracts of land that we would recommend that it exchange for the trust fund lands in the boundary waters. And we did add one piece of language that I think does also explain and give credence to the fact that this is our fiduciary responsibility as a legislature, in that we set the goals of the land exchange to basically read as: 1, the state receiving at least as many acres as the number given in exchange by the state, and that we reunite the mineral and surface rights. And with that, I would recommend that we adopt this committee report and pass it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Discussion of the report. The member from Hennepin, Representative Godinez. All those in favor of adoption of the Conference Committee report signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1750, as amended by the conference.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Godinez.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, members, this is a very different lands bill than you've ever seen on the House floor before. The normal process for a lands bill is for it to be an agreed upon, non-controversial bill, and that we trust that there is nothing in the bill that we couldn't all agree with. But this one is different. The process changed, and we had a major amendment on the House floor that did a land exchange, a major land exchange, that is proposed to be different than the one recommended by all the school trust groups that have been meeting for years. Whether it's good or bad or not is really hard to say, because we didn't have any public testimony. It was the wrong thing to do, and I am a no vote.
Discussion. The member from St. Louis, Representative Murphy M.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hancock, as I read through this, I see that the land that was for sale in my district, the St. Louis County land for sale in my district, where none of the authors had talked to me beforehand, is still in the bill. Since I talked on the floor the last time, someone from the county, a county commissioner, approached me and said that there would be more discussion in the future, but I still don't know the details of the land in St. Louis County, and so I will pursue that on my own when I go home to my district after the session is over, to find out just what portion of the land is indeed going to be sold, because my neighbors don't seem to know what portion of the land is going to be sold and what portion of the land is going to be kept. And there are 3 or 4 important county buildings on that land. And so thank you for listening, Representative Hancock, and good luck.
Discussion. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 95 ayes and 33 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference. Its title is agreed to. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. This is the Torkelson motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file, herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendment concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 2731, an act relating to energy. Torkelson moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House File 2731 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
Calling the member from Watonwan, Representative Torkelson, to explain the report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This came back from the Senate with a report attached to it. Decided that that was rather innocuous and that we would accept the Senate changes. Apparently the Senate needs more work to do. They don't have enough reports to read, so we will offer up one more for them. Thank you.
Discussion. All those in favor of adoption of the Conference Committee report signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2731 as amended by the Senate.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Pine, Representative Hilty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I just wanted to thank Representative Torkelson for bringing this bill along. It's an important issue, and I ask for a green vote.
Further discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the member from St. Louis. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 125 ayes and 3 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by the Senate. Its title is agreed to. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate file, herewith transmitted. Senate File 2098, signed K.L.R. Ludeman, Secretary of the Senate.
First reading. First reading of Senate files.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2098, an act relating to utilities. Murray moves that Senate File 2098, House File 2747, now on the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objections, so ordered. Call on the member from Polk, Representative Keel. For what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
In my small community of Crookston, Minnesota, we have a small candy store that has been in existence for a family for the last 100 years. When I stopped home this weekend, I stopped in and he had a few of those chippers that were originally made from Widman's. It is a potato chip covered in lots of chocolate, made by American Crystal Sugar, by the way. Anyway, I brought a couple of boxes and I'll leave them in the retiring room for everyone to enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Keel. Fiscal calendar. The first bill on the fiscal calendar today is Senate File 1922. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1922 on the fiscal calendar for today, the third engrossment, an act relating to state government.
Call the member from Scott, Representative Beard, to present your bill.
Mr. Speaker, members, thank you. Members, in a couple of committees, you heard this this year as it made its way through the process, House File 2169. This is the bill that we worked very diligently to get a good bill that it re-engages the legislature in the whole process of rulemaking with all of the agencies, members, and this is a bill that we've endeavored to craft so that the governor could actually sign this bill. So we've worked on the fiscal note, we've worked on the reach. Members, the bill, even though it's, I thought it was a great bill when it started, it's still a good bill because it does these three things yet. Members, it keeps us in the loop, requiring the agencies to do their rulemaking dockets to the committees of jurisdiction. At the moment, the existing statute says whenever they make a rule or going to propose a rule, they do the individual dribs and drabs, they dole them out to the committees. This says that by January 15th of every year, they'll know what their rulemaking docket is. Just provide that to the committees with jurisdiction over the agency and to the ranking minority members and to the Legislative Coordinating Commission. Pretty straightforward, reminds us that there's work to do every year when we're in the legislative session and we can see the whole docket at one time. Very low cost, very, I think, impactful to the legislature and the relationship between the legislature and the agencies in their rulemaking. Section 2 requires that the statement of need and reasonableness, which is an existing law, member, existing law requires every rule to have a statement of need and reasonableness. It adds one section to that they're supposed to be doing anyhow. It's called the cumulative effect law rule. They have to look at the cumulative effect of state and federal laws as you kind of add them up if they're in a specific area of impact and report those with that report in their docket making. The last part is an overlap, actually. Members, it's an overlap with an executive order Governor Dayton issued last year requiring the 5 environmental committees, including the Department of Agriculture, to do a report on how to streamline their process, prevent duplication, and avoid duplicative effort. Overlap, that's what I'm trying to say. We ask merely that that report be gussied up a little bit and reported to the committees and the LCC as well. Members, it's not a very big reach, but nonetheless, once again, it just helps bind the ties that keep us together and help us know what's coming down the pike. Members, that Senate file that we substituted the other day now, Senate File 1922, that's in its essence. Please vote green, Mr. Speaker. I'm ready to stand for questions.
Discussion. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Biskins and others moving to amend Senate File 1922 to third engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 967.
Call the member from Scott, Representative Biskins, to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members, and to my colleague from the fair County of Scott. I heard you refer to the bill as introduced as a great bill. Needed to be pared down to make it a good bill. Members, I hope you can help me turn it back into a great bill once again. All right. Members, what I have in front of us is a compromise language from an issue I've been working on for a long, long time. See, we have these things that govern the lives of the people of the state of Minnesota. We've got two separate and almost equal components. One is called statute, and the other is called administrative rules. Members, currently statute has to be approved by the legislature, all 201 members who hold an election certificate, and by the governor who also holds an election certificate. Unfortunately, the other half of the laws governing the people of the state of Minnesota, administrative rules, are done by bureaucrats. Done by bureaucrats and signed by nobody with an election certificate. Now, members, I've tried to take the big kahuna, which is that an administrative rule is only a rule until after the next legislature meets, so that the legislature either passes that rule or discards that rule. Well, I've had a tough time with that. So the compromise that I have right now, members, is before you in the amendment, the 812-0967 amendment. And what this amendment says, members, is see, currently in state law, we allow the agencies to create rules, but we also then allow the governor, who is ultimately responsible for the agencies, to veto a rule. Well, the amendment I have in front of you says, no, no, no. If it's going to have the force of law on the people of the state of Minnesota, it has to be signed by somebody with an election certificate. So what this amendment says, I take away the veto authority and I say it's only going to be a rule if the governor signs it as a rule. Folks, we've heard this phrase quite a bit the last dozen years or so, opt-in versus opt-out. Before something has the force of law on the people of the state of Minnesota, I think somebody with an election certificate should opt into it rather than say we need to opt out. Members, this good amendment, good rules reform, it turns Representative Beard's bill back from being good to being great, and I ask for your support.
Discussion. The member from Scott, Representative Beard.
Well, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Biskins and members, while this is a noble idea and one that I think would make a marvelous bill, and one that I would have endorsed gladly whenever the bill was like 13 pages long when it started. At this stage of the game, after hearing the advice and counsel of the agencies, the governor's office, and several committee stops, I'm going to respectfully ask that you vote no on the amendment. As I mentioned before, members, the idea is to tie the legislature and the agencies a little more together, to clarify those lines of communication and engage us, remind us of our responsibility in the rulemaking. This extends to the governor's office, and we haven't weighed in on that. We haven't vetted that in the process. As much as I appreciate the intent of the rule and am with you in spirit, this is not the bill nor the place. Members, I just ask for a red vote on a well-intentioned amendment.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would agree with Representative Beard that this is deserving a red vote. All session, all I've been hearing is the word efficiency. Let's be efficient around here. And then we get something else that says, oh no, no delegation of authority, no efficiency, vote no.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Greiling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm actually a yes on this. I'm a co-author and with my good friend Representative Biskins on this. There are occasions when liberal legislators and conservative legislators loop around and are with each other, and Representative Biskins and I have actually had several of these over our years of enjoying service together. But members, I did have occasion at one time to chair the Administrative Rule Commission or whatever it was before we abolished that. And this amendment, it sounds like this bill may be in trouble with the governor anyway, so why not be on the right side and vote for this good amendment? It goes along with my philosophy of rulemaking, which is the administration, headed up by the governor, are responsible for rulemaking. And rulemaking should be efficient if it's non-controversial, but if it's controversial, then time should be taken to make sure that the rules are done right. And the governor should be the bottom line to make sure that rules that go through quickly and are not controversial are really that, and he should sign them to make sure that's true. And if they're controversial, then he should pay close attention to them and make sure he supports them before his administration, his commissioners, pass things that have the force and effect of law. And things that do have the force and effect of law, as Representative Biskins said, should be signed off on by an elected official. So to me, this is a very easy one to vote yes on.
Discussion. The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I don't know how many people here actually said we need to make putting burdens, rules, and restrictions and laws on the backs of the people of the state of Minnesota more efficient. I've heard about government becoming more efficient, reduce bureaucracy, etc.
Representative Biskins, 1 minute, please. Members, if you could please take your conversations to the alcoves, or better yet, the retiring room. Representative Biskins, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members. Again, I'm befuddled to think that in a democracy we want to make restrictions on people more efficient. I think that's the last thing we'd like to do. Mr. Speaker, I have heard a number of members asking to vote red on this issue. I'd like to give them the opportunity to put up a red or a green. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask for a roll call.
Representative Biskins has requested a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call on the amendment. The member from Dakota, Representative Wardlow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, first of all, I'd like to thank Representative Biskins for bringing this fine amendment forward. Members, we have a situation in our state that is very similar to a situation with our federal government and similar to situations in other states across this nation. That is, we have administrative rulemaking run amok. And we have our liberties, our rights, constitutional, natural, and otherwise, being trod upon by administrative rule, as Representative Biskins said, rules that are passed that have the effect of law, but are not signed or authorized by anyone with an election certificate. And I believe that Representative Wagenius, I'm trying to remember exactly who spoke in favor, but at any rate, one of our colleagues across the aisle here made some very, very good comments just moments ago in favor of this proposal. This enhances the separation of powers. Representative Greiling, thank you. Representative Greiling, I think, hit the mark just precisely. This enhances the separation of powers because members' rules, administrative rules, are administrative in nature, they're executory in nature, and therefore it is fitting that the governor, the head of the administrative department, executive branch of our government, should approve them, as opposed to laws, which of course are enacted by the legislature. And remember, in Minnesota, the legislature has full lawmaking authority, so that if a law is not signed by the governor within 3 days after passage of a bill, with the exception for the end of session, then it passes immediately into law. The governor's veto power is strictly negative, and it's a legislative power, and you'll note that the governor's veto authority is actually found in the article of our state constitution regarding the legislature's authority. So it's a legislative power, a negative legislative power that the governor holds. Distinguishing that from rulemaking makes a lot of sense. So you have the governor approving affirmatively things that fall within the executory power of the state within his branch of government, and putting an additional check on rulemaking that's out of control and protecting our liberties and rights. So members, I urge a green vote on this amendment.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Kahn.
Mr. Speaker and members, I also stand and urge a green vote on this amendment. I don't understand what the problem is for doing it. Supposedly these rules are being adopted by the departments that are part of the governor's team. They just have to make the case of the governor to sign it, and the governor signs it. And if for some reason they haven't made their case well enough, then perhaps it shouldn't be adopted. I also work with Representative Greiling at this one point on a complete reform of rules, and I remembered when I first looked at Representative Beard's bill, the first comment I made to him was, this is much too wimpy, and when we were in charge of doing this, we looked at a much stricter control of rules. So I would suggest, Representative Beard, that you just accept this amendment and make your bill a little less wimpy.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Depke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is very similar to a bill that passed off of the House floor last week for the education portion of our statutes relating to the Department of Education. Exactly what is going on here is what other members and Representative Greiling spoke so eloquently on the House floor last week. For years, and particularly since we have a new Department of Education, I testified that this is a very important area in statute where we've got particularly in the bill that I presented on rulemaking for the Department of Education, that unless the rules that the Department of Education is making has gone through the proper rulemaking process, that they cannot be considered as law, and that's what's happening in our education community. The Department of Education, there's a lot of new people there, and particularly in the area of special education, that rules are being interpreted and made into laws without it being reviewed by the legislature, or, as this particular provision says, by a member with an election certificate. I wholly support Representative Biskin's bill, and I hope that the rest of you will as well. Thank you very much, members.
Member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm in the pleasant situation of joining Representative Kahn and Representative Greiling in a bipartisan support of this. One of the frustrations is at times we passed a bill last year. As a freshman, I've actually seen it. Passed a bill last year. There's testimony before the committee about some rules and procedures written up and being proposed, and the chairman goes, is this the intent of the legislature? And the agency testifier goes, yes, and the chair said, no, I chaired the committee that passed this, and etc. So at least the governor, who's been involved in every piece of legislation that's passed, would be able to give that second look, that common sense of whether the rules actually are matching the intent. And I think that is the greatest part of this amendment. We need the rules to match the intent, and that second check of giving the approval is the greatest thing I've seen this morning. Thanks.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Well, members, I'm going to support Representative Beard's request that we vote against this. And here's why. About 8-9 years ago, we passed, I'll take it back even farther. 15 years ago, we passed off this House floor some rules that affected the housing market and caused millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of damage through mold, through penetration of the exterior of the house. Because we, as legislators, as rule makers, thought we knew what we were doing. Several years later, in a bill that was carried here on the House floor, we moved all those building materials, building code decisions off this House floor to the Department of Labor and Industry, and we put professionals on. We put architects, engineers, plumbers, or pipe fitters, or boiler makers, or carpenters, whoever that particular trade was concerned with. And I know I'm a labor thug, so you always are a little bit leery, but I made sure that it was union and non-union, contractor and contractor, worker and worker. This entirely undoes that. This entirely undoes this. If we have rulemaking bodies that make the rules, they have to convince people that are professionals in the field that what our intent was, and that what we put into law actually makes sense and can be done. So members, this is a road that we could going down gets us into trouble again later on. So I'm going to be a red vote on this particular bill because I think if we don't have the experts, and we are not, we are lawyers, teachers, doctors, nurses, retired people doing this. It's a bad slope to go down, and I'd prefer to have professionals trying to interpret us, and then we can come back and change it the year later if we don't like what they did.
The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and to my friend from St. Paul. This bill does not change the rule-making process. The bill still asks the experts in the industry to come together. There is still the hearing. There is still the public input. All of that stuff stays in place. The only thing that changes in the rule-making process is, rather than the governor opting out of a rule that's been created, the governor opts into the rule that's been created. Before it has the force of law, somebody with an election certificate must sign off. The process that you're speaking to, Representative, does not change. The entire rulemaking process still stays intact. It's at the end game. Does the governor sign off before it becomes a rule, or does the governor passively sit by and let it become a rule, and thereby having plausible deniability? I don't think anyone with an election certificate should take plausible deniability. They should actively promote whatever their agency is promoting.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Kahn.
Mr. Speaker and members, Representative Mahoney sounds as if he never ever read the amendment. What he's talking about was something that was passed by law and had the legislature, I don't know the total issue of it, but it sounds like the legislature passed a really dopey law and then they had to come back and repeal it, which is true. This is really simple. The legislature passes something that authorizes some kind of rulemaking, and hopefully we've had discussions back and forth about can you do rules without specific legislative authorization. I would like to see more specific authorization, but in this case, when rules are being adopted, the governor then has to signify his approval. His people are doing these rules. They're his departments. If there isn't someone in the department who can explain it to the governor in times between 5 minutes and a half an hour why he should approve of it, then I don't think it should be put out for approval of the general public. This has nothing to do with what the legislature doing things badly, which we may sometimes do. So I certainly understood what Representative Mahoney was saying, except it didn't seem to have any bearing to the Biskins amendment. So vote yes on the amendment.
The member from Rams, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Someone informed me that I had said that vote no on the bill. I didn't mean that. I meant vote no on the amendment. And in response to my colleagues, the governor hires commissioners to look over these particular rule-making bodies. But the rules-making bodies are typically citizens. They are not employees of the government. They are not, they are volunteers, I should put it that way. They get per diem or travel or whatever that is, as little as that is. And then to try to explain to a governor, and typically they've been lawyers lately or something like that, the intricacies of construction is a little bit more than to just sit down for 5 minutes or 30 minutes. The rulemaking process, and I'll just use the plumbing code, has been going on for almost a year's worth of meetings. And they're going to sit down and tell someone what's all in that in a half an hour? Our governor is a very busy man. We make lots of rules. And I don't care whether it's the governor that's sitting here now or in the past or in the future. I certainly hope they have more important things to do than to micromanage which rule gets through. That's why we put regular people that actually have expertise in this particular body, this particular type of work, whether it is the healthcare field, the construction field, highway heavy field, whatever, aviation, whatever, medical, legal. If they're going to make rules, we want those people that actually do this for a living to make those rules. We don't want people that have, just because we have an election certificate, believe we know everything. Members, please vote against the amendment. The bill, we'll work on that later.
Discussion. The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Biskins yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Biskins, I have actually several questions, and some of them were kind of alluded to by Representative Mahoney. And I guess where I'd like to start is whether you can tell us how many rules this would entail every year. And what I'm really getting at there, more than the number of rules, is how much time you think this would take from a sitting governor. How much of his, how many hours do you expect that he would spend reviewing these rules if this amendment were to become law?
Member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, well, my hope is that it'd be about a half an hour for the entire year. I think we got way too much rules to begin with, all right? But that being said, Representative, I have no clue. And if you tell me that the governor is too gosh darn busy to review what his agency is imposing on the people of the state of Minnesota, and he's too busy to look it over, then I say shame on him. Then why do we have the veto authority if he's going to be too busy to even look at them? Shame on him if that's the case. But I'm not saying that about Governor Dayton, because I know he takes his job serious. I know his agency makes rules, and he looks over those rules to decide whether or not to veto them. Now he's going to look them over and decide whether or not to sign them.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Biskins. So you don't know how much time this would take or how many rules, and I hear from you that you're hoping probably that this is going to reduce the rulemaking in the state. My other questions are, do you know whether the commissioners already sign off on rulemaking within their agencies?
The member from Scott will yield. Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative, I don't bother to memorize things I can look up, and I could probably look that up, but I'm telling you, my gut says, yes, they do sign off. But I don't know one commissioner that stands for election to get that post, that goes in front of the people and says, elect me commissioner. That doesn't happen. And yet, if they're going to create rules that have the force of law on the people of the state of Minnesota, then it should have the signature of somebody who has stood before the people of the state of Minnesota and said, elect me, and a commissioner is not that person.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Biskins. Well, I was going to ask a further question, but I don't think I need to, because I think it's becoming pretty clear here. You know, Representative Biskins, this is your amendment, so if you don't know the answers, I mean, that right there, I think, says something. When you bring in an amendment, you don't know what effect it would have. You don't know whether the commissioners sign off. You assume they do. Well, the commissioners are appointed by the governor. He's ultimately responsible for what they do. And, of course, we all know that the legislature can overturn by statute any rule that's passed, of course with the signature of a governor or maybe an override in some cases. So, you know, I was going to ask you, but I don't think I need to ask, that the governor already can look at and can tell the commissioners not to approve any rule that he thinks is appropriate. So, you know, often, Representative Biskins, we hear from you that we shouldn't add words to statutes, and I don't know if you're actually adding words here or subtracting words, but I think this is just messing with the wheels of government. I don't see that it serves any real purpose. We can already review rules that are passed. The governor's an elected person. He's responsible for people he appoints. I think this is just a micromanagement, as somebody else said here on this floor, just trying to micromanage the governor and, you know, get him all tied up in the minutia of agencies and the rules. You know, part of the reason that agencies make rules and have this process, and as I understand, it's a public process where citizens can weigh in on these various rules, And it's because we, the legislature, can't deal with all the minutia, and the governor is one person, and he has a lot of higher-level decisions to make. He appoints people to carry out his policies. He can always overrule them if he chooses to, and I just think this is just making government that much more cumbersome. It increases bureaucracy, and I urge members to vote no.
The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Deep breath. I find the argument from the member from Rochester to be shallow and spurious. I know exactly what this amendment does, members, and so does anyone sitting here listening. Using just a little logic, members, we tell the governor to look over every rule that is promulgated. We tell him that by giving him the veto authority. Now, if he is going to take that authority seriously, members, that means he is reviewing the rule. If he is already reviewing the rules and taking his job seriously, which I said and I believe Governor Dayton does do, is take his job seriously, then how much more time does it take to sign your name? You know, I sit here back at the SOB, never here on the House floor, but back at the SOB, and I see legislators all the time with stacks of letters, signing and signing and signing. It doesn't take that long, folks. I'm not asking the governor to do anything more than he does already, which is to look over the rules. He does that because he knows he has the authority to veto them. All I'm saying is that instead of vetoing them, sign your name to them. Not that hard. Please vote yes.
Discussion. Further discussion to the amendment. The member from Hennepin, Representative Khan.
One last point. If the governor trusts his commissioners, if he trusts the work that the department is doing, he should have no problem signing off on it. If there's something wrong with the rule that impedes on that trust, then he ought to think twice about it and not sign off. If this is working the way it should, if the rules, as we've said, if the rules, as we've said, have been done by these appropriate, knowledgeable sources, they've convinced people up the line in the departments of experts, then there's no call for any micromanaging. The governor just okays what's been done and signs off on it. If something's happened that the governor has doubts about it, then I think the rules should not get into effect. This is just a common sense bill. If the rules process is working well, it will add very little extra time to what a governor has to do. And the only extra time it will add to the department is they'll have to think about this rule and think about what do we have to do to this rule so that it will make sense for the governor to approve of it. And I don't think that's a bad exercise for the departments.
Seeing no further discussion and roll call being requested, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 54 ayes and 74 nays, the amendment is not adopted. Seeing no further amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1922.
Third reading, discussion to the bill. The member from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Beard, when I first read your bill, where it talks about cumulative effect, meaning the impact that results from the incremental impact of a proposed rule, I was intrigued by it. Because if you're doing something like making a rule with air quality, you want to know the incremental effects of, is your air getting better, a little bit better, a lot better, a lot worse. And if I thought that was the only thing that we would get out of this bill, I would be a green vote. But unfortunately, you read the language very carefully, and on line 2 besides all the reports and all the things that you all tell us you don't want to do, there's a lot more reporting and stuff. But on line 2.29 and 2.30, an agency has to make an assessment of the cumulative effect of the rule with other state and federal regulations related to the specific purpose of the rule. So in this case, for example, the specific purpose of the rule is to increase the breathability of air, or maybe to just make sure that our air quality doesn't get worse. But my gosh, kids are going to grow up breathing bad air for a whole generation before anything happens under this, because it's so unduly burdensome to have to look at every other federal and state regulation related to air. That's just, in my judgment, nuts. So, members, if you are interested in making sure that that bills are designed to get the job done, but not gum up the works, you want to vote no on this bill.
Discussion. Further discussion to the bill. The author of the bill, the member from Scott, Representative Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, thank you for the good discussion. As you can tell, rulemaking has always touched a nerve here. The rules that Representative Mahoney referred to back in, I believe, 1999 resulted in a report from all agencies that was given to this body in 2003. The effect of this bill is to basically ask those agencies to update the report they gave us in 2003. Just kind of tells what they've done over the last 9 years and what they're proposing over the next 18 to 24 months, which they do now and publish in the State Register anyhow. Now they will just notify us. Thank you for the good discussion on the cumulative effects. Representative Wagenius, members, the agencies, when they promulgate rules, go to the business community now or to anybody with a permit and ask them to tell them what the cumulative effect of their efforts and their activities will be, whether it's on the environment or whether it's on the people surrounding them. That is, in my opinion, a reasonable request. Oftentimes we layer small rule upon small rule. I think it's a reasonable request for us as policymakers to at least be aware of what's happening in other areas of rulemaking and other areas of regulatory effort. And we can actually ask and have a good discussion about whether or not incrementalism reaches a point of diminishing returns, where rulemaking is now just onerous and doesn't actually have the benefit we think it would if it was in a standalone environment. I think the cumulative effect addition to the bill is actually helpful, no matter what side of the discussion you're on, in just shedding further light on the impact that we, through the agencies, have on our citizens and on people trying to produce wealth, create jobs, and just move life ahead generally. Members, there's a lot more we could comment on, but it's been a good discussion. I just encourage you to vote green on Senate File 1922. Thank you very much.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. clerk will close the roll. There being 88 ayes and 40 nays, the bill is passed. Its title is agreed to. Announcements by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of following members of the House to a conference committee on Senate File 1717. Lemire, Pepin, and Hodge.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration. Dean for the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rule 121, designates the following bills to be placed on the supplemental calendar for today, for Monday, April 23, 2012. House File Number 2795, Senate File 1933, House File Number 2379, Senate File Number 1694, and House File Number 1975.
Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 1694. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
Senate File 1694, number 4 on the supplemental calendar, the second engrossment, an act relating to public safety.
Call the member from Washington, Representative Creasel, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Earlier this month, we heard a bill that expands legal fireworks in Minnesota to include bottle rockets and firecrackers. You may recall that the bill was sent to the House Government Operations Committee to address its impact on local units of government. Since then, the Senate passed their version of the fireworks bill, and that's the version that's before us today. The differences in the bill: the Senate uses the term aerial and audible fireworks to describe what the House referred to as consumer fireworks. The definition is still the same. The Senate also removed the cap on the license fees that local governments can charge fireworks retailers and instead uses the term reasonable amount. I've continued speaking with representatives on the other side of the aisle and the governor's office in an effort to further craft the language that will ease their concerns. So, Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to offer the 507 amendment, the RA-12 507 amendment.
There is an author's amendment at the desk. The Chief Clerk will report the author's amendment.
Creasel and others moving to amend Senate File 1694, the second engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 507.
Call the member from Washington, Representative Creasel, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd also like to offer an oral amendment to the amendment.
Please report your oral amendment for the Chief Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On line 1.5, after aerial and audible devices, remove the comma, insert and then after display fireworks, please remove sparkling devices and novelties.
The Chief Clerk will report the oral amendment.
Creasel is modifying his amendment as follows. On line 5 of his amendment, the 507 amendment, after devices, delete the comma, insert and after fireworks, delete the comma. On line 6, delete sparkling devices, comma, and novelties.
The member from Washington, Representative Creasel, to the author's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've worked with Representative Winkler and also worked with the governor's office to clear up some of the concerns with the bill. I know that there were some local control concerns. What we've done here is we've made sure that local units of government are able to enact ordinances that would restrict the use, not completely prohibit. My concern is I don't want to create a big patchwork situation across the street, but this does give local units of government some room to make sure that these are being used in a safe manner and within a reasonable period of time. This also limits the sale and use of fireworks in the state of Minnesota from June 1 to July 7 of any year. So this is an effort to compromise and make sure that we're giving the most comfort for people that were concerned. That's the time of year that most people want to use them anyway. This way the concerns that we've all heard about having them go off in September, October, November, all hours of the night. I tried to do everything I could to make sure that that's under control.
Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members, and thank you to Representative Kriesel for working with us on this amendment. Members, this just basically makes clear that counties, cities, townships can have some reasonable restrictions on the use of fireworks to meet with local needs. I think it is a good compromise. I urge adoption of the amendment, and we'll talk later about final vote on the bill.
Discussion to the amendment. The member from Olmsted, Representative Benson M.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. While you have at your desk an amendment that I would also like to have heard, I think that Representative Kriesel's amendment goes a long way in satisfying some, if not all, of the things that I had concerns about. I do have a piece, Representative Kriesel, in mind that talks about the National Fire Protection Association standards for the housing and sale. And I'm wondering if you could stand for a question and answer a question regarding whether or not this would also make sure that there's distances and things that, in terms of permitting, that must be adhered to before someone can erect a facility that would either house, manufacture, or sell these fireworks.
Representative Kriesel will yield. The member from Washington, Representative Kriesel.
Mr. Speaker, I couldn't hear. If he could repeat the question, please.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Benson M.
Yes, Representative Kriesel. In my amendment, I do have something. I have still some concern regarding your bill, in that there are some pretty strict standards with the National Fire Protection Association standard. One of the concerns that I have is that both my fire chief in Rochester and the Fire Chiefs Association didn't like the bill as it was written, at least in the beginning. But there are some standards regarding the manufacture and storage and sale that are covered in Standard 1124 of the National Fire Protection Association. Can you tell me whether or not that any protections are provided for this standard in your bill?
The member from Washington, Representative Kriesel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Benson, from my understanding, the APA 87-1 standard does refer to the NFPA 1124 standard that you were just discussing.
Discussion. The member from Nicollet, Representative Morrow.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Kriesel would yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kriesel, I just want to make sure I understand as I'm looking at the amendment. You mentioned towns or counties being able to regulate. I'm reading your amendment. I'm not seeing the word county, and so I'm just wondering if you could show me where in the bill or the amendment counties are included.
The member from Washington, Representative Kriesel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Morrow. That's covered in chapters 365, 368, 412, and 462. So lines 1.4 and 1.5 is, from what I understand, was the language we worked on with Representative Winkler.
Further discussion to the author's amendment. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the author's amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the next amendment.
Benson M. and others moving to amend Senate File 1694, the second engrossment as amended as follows. The amendment is coded A24.
Call the member from Olmsted, Representative Benson M. to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I came here today out of respect for the author. The last time it was heard, I sat in my seat as we debated the bill, although I'd have to say that I felt like one of the only adults still in the room, because I still have a lot of concern with fireworks bill that puts pretty powerful fireworks in the hands of, unfortunately, people or minds that aren't necessarily always mature. I tell a story about a good friend of mine in high school who took fireworks similar in the size, and these aren't just firecrackers and bottle rockets, and emptied out the black powder in these and put it in a pan, and unfortunately it got sparked and he burned his hand so bad that it took 5 surgeries, the first 2 just to separate his fingers. Not a very smart thing to do, but I would add that this gentleman did go on to become a professor of theology at Harvard University. So it kind of, he's not a dumb man, but sometimes when we're 15 or 16, we're not so smart. So I still have a lot of problems with the bill, and I think that the author has went a ways, at least to help add some comfort to it, in that there's some local regulation. That's the other thing that I had problems with. We're always about limited government, or at least giving the power to the people closest to the area, so local control. And I thought, at least the way it was written in the beginning, it did not allow for hardly any local control. And I see that's in that. So, Mr. Speaker and members, I withdraw my amendment.
Representative Benson withdraws withdraws his amendment. There is an amendment at the desk. The Chief Clerk will report the next amendment.
Atkins moving to amend Senate File 1694. The second engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 501.
Call the member from Dakota, Representative Atkins, to present your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't believe that the amendment's been distributed yet, but if it's the 501 amendment, it's a fairly straightforward amendment, and I'm hoping that the chief author may support it. It just says that an adult may not use or supervise the use of these sorts of fireworks while under the influence. In my experience, my favorite holiday growing up was always the 4th of July, because we'd go to my Uncle Jerry's and he'd shoot off a bunch of illegal fireworks. It was always my favorite holiday until the fire happened. And what was the primary cause of that fire wasn't just my momentary lack of judgment as a 12-year-old, but the fact that the people around were not exactly in a position to be supervising such behavior. So Representative Kriesel, hopefully I've talked long enough so you've had a chance to look at the amendment. I'd appreciate your weighing in, and then we'll determine whether or not to ask for a roll call. But it just says that you got to be sober to supervise or use this sort of fireworks. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And members, we again will not vote on the amendment until all members have had a chance to look at the amendment. So we will be in discussion until the membership has fully received the amendment. The member from Washington, Representative Kriesel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, it's not our job to legislate common sense. I do support what the meaning of the bill is here, or of the amendment, but I mean, it needs a lot of work. Does it create a new law? What's the penalties? I mean, do we really want to go so far so police officers are going up into people's yards, giving them a breathalyzer? I would respectfully ask for a no vote on this, please.
Discussion. The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, I would ask the same that Representative Kriesel did, to vote no. This is very intrusive, and just one thing we were worried about the other day was over control and looking for trouble. Now we got people walking up into people's yards judging how, if they are or are not under the influence. It's almost unenforceable and just a disaster waiting to happen. Thank you.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that answers that question. I'd ask for a roll call, please, and then I'd like to talk to the amendment a little bit more.
Representative Atkins has requested a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
I'll be pretty brief, Mr. Speaker. If you vote no, what you're saying is that drunk folks can supervise kids shooting off fireworks. If that's what you want, I'd be a little taken aback by that. But all the amendment does is say if you're drunk, you can't supervise kids shooting off fireworks. I'd appreciate a green vote and some common sense. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Discussion. The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Atkins yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Atkins, I'm just looking at your amendment, and it was just sort of handed out, and just curious as to whether or not that you have seen this language in any other portions of law and legislation. I'm not aware of any. And that, do we do this for other sorts of things where we don't say, are you drunk? Are you at .08? Are you legally impaired? For example, if you are supervising children in a licensed situation, if you're supervising others, if you're operating a boat, pulling a water skier, it seems as though you're setting a legal precedence for alcohol. You're saying knowingly under the influence of a hazardous substance. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Does that mean 1 beer or 2 beers, or does that mean any kind of a medication? I'm wondering if you know of anywhere else in legislation where we say if you have any sort of substance that may or may not affect you, that you're somehow far afield of the law. I'm just wondering if, I know you're a lawyer, if this is come up, if you've seen this elsewhere in legislation, or if this has come to you from some sort of an outside group, and just where this might have come from, Representative Adkins.
Member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Dean. Yes, is the short answer. I went to the revisor's office and I asked them for an amendment that said that you can only use and supervise kids using fireworks when you're sober. And they said, here's the language that we use in our statutes. Thank you.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Atkins. Can you point out where in statute that might be, so that I might be able to take a look at it and fish it out of there, because it sounds a little odd.
The member from Dakota will yield. Member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Dean. I will check with the revisor and get you some statutory references. I didn't make this up. I went to them, and with literally what I told them is give me an amendment that says that you can only use these and supervise kids when you're sober. They said this is the language we use in our statutes. I put a great deal of credence in our revisor's abilities, but I will certainly find you some statutory references. Thank you.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
If Representative Atkins would continue to yield, I'm just wondering...
He will yield, Representative Dean.
I'm wondering if we do this in licensed daycare centers, if we do this in paramedics who have to take care of other folks, if there's a zero tolerance, if there is anyone for taking any medication that might prohibit you from... I'm thinking we do a lot of things where we take under our care other folks where we're not asking them to do this, but we're going to ask them to be at a higher threshold for lighting off a bottle rocket than we are perhaps for monitoring children or putting our others in the care or supervision of adults or other supervisors. So I'm a little bit leery of that before I see another piece of legislation, because I'm not aware of any, and I'm sure as folks who are on the committees that supervise on the Judiciary Committee and others where we look at law enforcement, and maybe Representative Cornish can help me out, or some others that can maybe direct us to those. That would be interesting. But also, Representative Atkins, what's the penalty? What's the penalty if somebody says that I'd like to light off a piece of a blackjack firecracker, and I have maybe some cough medicine or something that I've taken, am I going to get arrested? Is there a legal penalty? What are you proposing with your legislation, Representative Atkins? Because I don't really understand.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Dean, for, I won't say you're long-winded, but thank you for the long question, because it gave me 4 things that I can tell you. First off is I would cite Minnesota Statute 624.7142, where much of this language was drawn from. It applies when you're carrying, under the influence of alcohol or controlled substance, a pistol. And it seems to me, Representative Dean, that when you're talking about, in fact, let me cite for you 3 numbers that I hope you'll remember. 380%, 18,000, and 1 pound. It sounds like I'm being Karnak. I should have an envelope at my head. 380%, 18,000, and 1 pound. 380% is the percentage by which the number of injuries in Minnesota increased in the 4-year period after Minnesota legalized fireworks in 2002 versus the previous 4-year period. Pretty dangerous stuff. Even these little things, these little sparklers we walk around with, 380% increase in injuries, Representative Dean. Thank you for returning, Representative Dean. Next would be 18,000. That's the number of firefighters who are represented by groups, and there's a handout coming, Representative Dean. 18,000 firefighters represented by organizations that oppose this because of the danger, that 380% increase that we talked about, that oppose this because of the danger. And finally, 1 pound. That's the amount of explosives that you are talking about placing in the hands of possibly children or people under the supervision of folks who are drunk. 380% increase in injuries, 18,000 firefighters, and 1 pound of explosives. That, to me, Representative Dean, seems like kind of a big deal, and certainly enough so that we don't want people to be operating these or using these sorts of things while they're not sober, or if they're supervising children while they're not sober. I hope that answers your question, but I'd also again refer you back to Minnesota Statute 624-7142. Thank you.
Discussion. The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And, you know, I think I could address a little bit of Representative Dean's question, too, because this under the influence of alcohol, even though it doesn't seem very specific, we use that language in our criminal statute for drunk driving. So even though in our statute we have a very specific blood alcohol amount, you don't have to have that blood alcohol amount. You just have to be under the influence. And so that is something that it's not really ill-defined. And then also, I think that in our law, if the penalty is not described, there is sort of an automatic penalty, and I was looking for that quickly, but I didn't find it. But I don't think that's a problem either, Representative Dean. So I have a little bit of a concern here, and that's just that I think the amendments, we have another one on our desk from Representative Atkins that would say that people younger than 18 can't use these things unless they're under the supervision of an adult, and I think we just got them backwards here. So it seems to me like we're taking the Second Amendment first, but if we would assume that it would come after the other one, it makes a lot of sense to me, because these are very dangerous things. I think Representative Atkins made the case very, very well. And, you know, when we debated this before, a lot of people stood up and said, you can't tell Minnesotans they can't have these things. But you know, I think that it's very reasonable, and we do in a lot of other places in law tell kids that they can't have something that adults can have, or we let them have it only under the supervision of adults. So this seems to me like an entirely reasonable thing to do if we're going to open things up. And then, you know, to the argument that people make, oh, how are we going to enforce this? Are cops going to come on people's land and all of that stuff? You know, members, I think there's a real divide here. Either you believe that it matters if something is against the law, or you don't. You know, the value of having something be prohibited in law is not that people are going to get arrested and charged, but in fact, a lot of our citizens do care what the law is. And no, of course, it doesn't prevent people from doing illegal stuff. We all know that. You know, if every law we passed around here got complied with perfectly, we could fire all the cops, you know, save a lot of money. But no, we know that enforcement is necessary, and even when a law isn't enforced, having it on the books can matter, can make a difference. So I think this is an important thing to do. If we're going to dramatically expand the sale of fireworks in this state, which is what this bill is doing, I think it makes a lot of sense to put on Representative Atkins' amendment and make sure that children, if we can put on the other amendment, and certainly people who are intoxicated are not using these things and not supervising children who are using them. I think that's kind of the least we can do. And if it isn't followed perfectly, at least people will know that this legislature thought it was reasonable to say at least you got to be in control of your faculties in order to deal with this very dangerous substance.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Members, Mr. Speaker and members, this amendment and the one after it are a nightmare. For all of you Ron Paulites or libertarians, do you really want to give police another excuse to have reasonable suspicion to come up in your yard? Representative Rukavina, think about this. Not only now will we be judging if somebody is under the influence from the patrol car or from the curb, but you're giving the cop an excuse to walk up into your yard and ask people about whether they've been drinking or not, and then make a snap judgment on whether they're under the influence without even the PBT even mentioned here. And most of these laws, Representative Atkins, that you mentioned have a specific limit of intoxication. You don't have anything in here. It's like 0.04 for commercial driver's license. I think it's the same for carrying a pistol. You can't be under the influence over a certain amount, and there's no penalty in here. This is very poorly written, and we don't need to be giving people excuses to come up in your yard. Another one is the age. Now we're going to take a guess on how old people are. We're going to come up to kids. You're going to ask kids how old they are, make them show their ID. This is totally pervasive in the authority that it gives officers to come up in your yard. And Representative Atkins told you that 18,000 firefighters oppose this. That's not true at all. The fire chiefs oppose it, and not even all of them. In fact, I had a firefighter come up in my room the other day, and he was talking about other legislation that we got here that affect unions. And I asked him about the firefighter bill, and he says, "Are there any fire chiefs around here?" And he leaned ahead and he looked out my door and he said, "That's not true at all. Firefighters don't oppose this, our chiefs do." And that's exactly the people that you see that are going to take advantage of this are firefighters and peace officers. They're going to be shooting off the fireworks if we pass this. So that's just bogus. So with that, I would ask you to oppose this amendment and the one after it. And you've been given a bunch of misinformation here. Thank you.
The member from Grant, Representative Westrom.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree with Representative Cornish. Representative Atkins, why don't you talk to Representative Rukavina, but I'm going to ask him some questions if Representative Rukavina would yield.
He will yield. Representative Westrom.
Representative Rukavina, I don't know about your area, but I think it's pretty similar to my area. Have you ever seen anybody lighting off fireworks up in your area, Representative Rukavina?
The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, Representative Westrom, the only difference between your district and mine is they keep sending a good Democrat down from my district and they keep sending a good Republican down from yours. But no, we like to blast off fireworks, and we probably do it from May Day to New Year's Day.
Member from Grant, Representative Westrom.
Mr. Speaker, if he would...
I'm glad your side of the aisle caught that.
Representative Westrom, you have the floor.
Mr. Speaker, if he would yield for one more question.
He will yield, Representative Westrom.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Rukavina, any idea if there's ever a dad or a mom that might have a part of a beer with their supper and then they go out and light off a bottle rocket after that? And they're under the influence, according to this amendment. Any idea if you have any constituents that do that?
Member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Well, Mr. Speaker, even worse than that example, Representative Westrom, is I'm wondering, like, if I sprained my back, working in the woods, and I had a muscle relaxant, I think, according to this, I'm going to be, well, let's just put it this way. This is a perfect example why the only constitutional amendment I'll support is one that restricts the number of lawyers in this body. Okay?
Member from Grant, Representative Westrom.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Representative Rukavina, you're a good witness to depose, so thank you for your answers. Representative Atkins, can't you just let Minnesotans have a little bit of fun? That's really what this amendment is about. It's saying, thou shalt have no fun in Minnesota, period. Thou shalt have no fun in Minnesota, period. That's what Representative Atkins' amendment is standing for. Members, over the 4th of July, I think everybody in this body would probably know somebody that maybe has had a beer. They can drive a car, but they can't let off a bottle rocket if this amendment goes on. They can drive a boat. They can't let off a firecracker if this amendment goes on. Folks, it is time we open up this law. It is time we just make the citizens of Minnesota legal, Representative Atkins. This is going on all the time. My district is near the border. So are many districts down here. You don't have to be very observant to know that people are traveling across the border for a little bit of fun around the 4th of July. Children enjoy it. Parents enjoy it. There's a patriotism, a sense of patriotism that goes with it. Representative Atkins, I think this is a silly amendment. I think if we're going to open up fireworks and make legal what's already being done in our state by and large, we ought to just do it with common sense, Representative Atkins. We aren't supporting people being inebriated or drunk. Your amendment says, thou shalt not have any influence of alcohol. Or as Representative Rukavina said, if you've got a prescription drug, you'd be in violation if you're letting your children or if you're letting off a bottle rocket. And lastly, Representative Atkins, you talked about the firefighters. I had them in my office this year. And they were bringing this issue up, and I said, guys, I said, let me ask you really directly. Have any of you guys let off fireworks? Kind of got silent in the office. Yeah, we do. Yeah, once in a while we do, or our children do. I said, you can't be serious that you're really down here lobbying hard against this. No, it isn't that big of a deal, but that's what our organization told us to talk about. So, Representative Atkins, it's not all 18,000 that are saying this is an absolute law that has to stay in effect. Members, let's vote for a little bit of freedom. Let's make the citizens of Minnesota legal on what they're already doing, and life will go on just fine, allowing a little bit of fun and fireworks, and let the state collect the revenue instead of sending it to the Dakotas or Wisconsin.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson S.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Westrom. I shared some of the concerns that you expressed here with this amendment and what it may do, but I did have a couple of questions for Representative Atkins if he'd yield.
Representative Atkins will yield. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Atkins, now the way I understand it, I could maybe just have a sip of beer and that would be considered under the influence under this bill, under this amendment. Is that correct?
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Anderson, if you are under the influence of, there's several items in the amendment, but the short answer is yes. If you're under the influence of alcohol or drugs or anything else, you shouldn't be setting off a pound's worth of explosives.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I failed to clarify, or supervising a child setting off a pound's worth of explosives.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So a sip of beer would disqualify you from shooting off a firework. Let me ask you this, Representative Atkins. If I happen to be standing next to my husband and he says, hey, honey, can you hang on to my beer? It's half drunk. And at that moment, right at that moment, the police come barreling into the yard and they say, you're the only sober person, but you happen to be holding that beer, so you are under the influence. I mean, how are they going to determine whether you're under the influence here? Can you help me out with that a little bit?
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson, by determining whether or not you're under the influence, the fact that you could be holding a case of beer, and that doesn't make you under the influence.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Atkins, but the thing of it is your amendment doesn't say that. In fact, your amendment just says under the influence, which could be taken under an interpretation that is at the beck and call of that law enforcement officer. He could come in and say, you're hanging on to a beer here that's half empty, even though you know you have not taken a single drop that night. That law enforcement officer can say, you're under the influence, I see you have a bottle in your hand, boom, you're gone. Let me ask you one more question, Representative Atkins. What happens if a law enforcement agent comes to a person's property and finds that 3 out of the 4 people are, in your words, under the influence? Maybe they're drunk, maybe not. But the 4th person isn't, and they happen to be there supervising and so forth. Would those other 3 people, just because they're there, would they be considered supervising, and would they be charged with a misdemeanor?
Representative Atkins will yield. The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Anderson. I'd suggest to you that it would be interpreted the same way as, for example, when we apply it to pistols or other use of deadly weapons, things that can cause serious injuries and death, like a gun, like a pound's worth of explosives, that the application would be the same. But no, if you're not supervising, if you're not using the fireworks, it seems a little far-fetched to have that being the case. Or even if you're wearing one of those helmets with the 2 beer cans on either side, if you're not under the influence, Representative Anderson, you're not under the influence. If you just simply read the plain text of the statute, I think it's fairly apparent.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Atkins, but your amendment is not clear, and that's the issue that concerns me the most. You could have a situation, we all know what happens when somebody has a house party. They don't arrest just the one drunk person in the bunch, they arrest everybody in the bunch. And my concern is you could have one designated person that's in charge of supervising, but because other people there have consumed, mind you, taken 1 sip of beer, that they would be considered under the influence and would be charged with a misdemeanor. Members, please vote no.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
No, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've already said enough on this. This is one crazy idea. Representative Atkins, I got to give you credit. You've come up with some wackos, but this one could take the cake.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I anticipate not offering the next amendment, which would apply to allow for children using these sorts of things, using a pound worth of explosives. I intend and will soon withdraw this amendment. The point was to illustrate the fact that even folks, regardless, and I very much appreciate what Representative Cornish and Representative Westrom and Representative Anderson have all pointed out, which is how are we going to measure whether somebody's under the influence or not? The fact is that if you are in fact allowing for, and it will be perfectly legal if we pass Representative Creasel's law as is. You talk about poor drafting, Representative Anderson. Take a look at Representative Creasel's bill. Right now you could be completely schnockered in the terms, that's an Inver Grove term or a South St. Paul term. If you're not familiar with that, that's completely off your butt drunk. And it would be perfectly legal under Representative Creasel's current version of his bill without any further amendment. I appreciate deeply the points that you have made, that it could be just a sip of beer, maybe it's a couple beers, maybe it's impaired, maybe it's not impaired. The fact is under the language of this bill, you could be at 0.25, 0.35, shooting off fireworks that weigh a pound or more, and supervising children as they shoot off fireworks that weigh a pound or more. That's under the language of this bill, so thank you very much, Representative Anderson and others, for illustrating just how poorly drafted this is. That should at least be tightened up before this bill ever moves forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, I withdraw the amendment.
Representative Atkins withdraws the RA-12 amendment. Representative Atkins, you have a second amendment at the desk. Would you like to present that amendment? Representative from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've already intimated what my intention is with respect to this amendment. The amendment's fairly straightforward. It would say that kids under the age of 18 are not allowed to set off a pound's worth of fireworks. I do have a question for Representative Creasel relative to this amendment, though, and I know he's being consulted with as we speak. If he'll yield, Mr. Speaker.
I'm sorry, Representative Atkins, would you like to present the amendment, or would you just like to ask Representative Creasel to yield?
I would like to have the amendment before us, so I'll let the clerk report it. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Yep, the clerk will report the amendment.
Atkins moving to amend Senate File 1694, the second engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 502.
Call the member from Dakota, Representative Atkins, to your amendment.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Creasel will be so kind to yield.
He will yield, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kriesel, in just very quickly here, I pulled up on the web. Apparently what you can do is you can tie these fireworks together. That's recommended by, let's see what, this is bigfireworks.com. And what they've suggested is that you can take these 500 grams, it's actually a pound worth of explosives, and by putting them together and fusing them together, you can actually set off several pounds of explosives, one after another. Under your bill, would a kid age 10, 11, 12 years old be allowed to do that?
The member from Washington, Representative Kriesel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Atkins, that would be if someone over the age of 18, which is the only legal age according to my bill to purchase fireworks, if they purchased that for them, then gave it to the child and let them do whatever, then I suppose, like alcohol, like other stuff, if someone of age purchased it, then it's on.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Kriesel, but it isn't like alcohol. As dangerous as alcohol might be, it's still a crime if a kid possesses that and uses it on their own, whether it's under the supervision or not of an adult. If they take it out of your garage and they're off drinking, the cops can bust them for that. My question to you, if Representative Kriesel will yield once again, Mr. Speaker?
He will yield, Representative Atkins.
My question to you is, let's assume that Dad went over to Wisconsin, by the way, where, as I understand it, you can buy them, but you can't use them. Wisconsin law is kind of funky like that. But you bring back and you got several pounds of explosives. And you've got them in the garage, and you're off at work, and the 10 or 11 or 12-year-old, would it be perfectly legal under your bill for that 10, 11, 12-year-old to take, let's say, 4 or 5 or 10 of those? Now they've got 10 pounds of explosives. Could they fuse them all together and light them all off? Is that perfectly legal under your bill?
The member from Washington, Representative Kriesel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Atkins, if someone provided them with those fireworks, then I suppose it would be.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Then one final question, if Representative Kriesel will yield.
He will yield, Representative Atkins.
What happens, Representative Kriesel, if they weren't provided? They were just, you got mom or dad or whatever bought them. The kids took them out of the garage. And they, which this will shock you, but that's what we used to do when we were kids, is we'd have fireworks in the garage, and we'd take them out, and we'd go and shoot them off on our own. But is it okay for a 10, 11, 12-year-old, granted they can't purchase them, but 10-year-old takes 10 pounds of explosive, fuses them all together, and goes and shoots them off? That's perfectly legal under your bill?
The member from Washington, Representative Kriesel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Atkins, no, they cannot use them.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Kriesel. You may say that. I would suggest you read your bill, because they absolutely can. And I'm going to withdraw the amendment at this point, Mr. Speaker. That's just one more point illustrating the dangers of this bill. If you want to tighten it up, that's one thing. But to just turn it wildly loose, you've got kids that could possibly use any amount of fireworks. You've got folks that could use them while they're not sober or under the influence of drugs. It's a very loosely drafted bill. And no, Representative Westrom, I'm not anti-fun. I just don't like to see kids with blown-off fingers. Mr. Speaker, I withdraw the amendment.
Representative Atkins withdraws the 502 amendment. Seeing no further amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1694, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. Discussion. The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I just want to rise in support of Senate File 1694, the Representative Kriesel's bill. And I have to tell you, I know that there's a reasonable role for government, but for those who are opposed to this namby-pamby, nanny state, no fun, we have to tell you what to do attitude has to stop. I got a message for everybody about these fireworks. We're already buying them. I'm one of them. We go over to Wisconsin, we buy the fireworks, we set them off. Anyone who's been in the South Metro knows that the fireworks show the residents put on is far better than the one the municipalities sponsor. It's already happening. Members, let's make sure that we don't turn every citizen into a criminal. Let's give them the opportunity just to have a little bit of fun. Please vote green on Representative Kriesel's bill.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Murphy M.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise to oppose the bill. today I'm opposing the bill. And 10 years ago I opposed the bill. 20 years ago I opposed the bill. I love to have fun. I love the 4th of July. New Year's Eve I'm not so crazy about. I have just great memories of my youth and firecrackers. The 4th of July, cutting hay, getting the hay all cut before the 4th of July so we could go to the lake, have a picnic, good food, beer. That strawberries, think of strawberries on the 4th of July and potato salad, games. When I got to the legislature, when we talked about these bills, it was kind of like today and last week. It's for the kids. And sure, I know we can't bubble wrap the world. It's freedom, economic development, jobs. Think of the money we're losing. We can have freedom and have a safe and sane event. But then I think about the last time my brothers and me, I shot firecrackers. And the cows ran down in the field. And they didn't come back for the milking. And Watch, my dog, Watch didn't come back for 3 days. Watch was shaking and hiding out and was so scared. And we never did that again. Dad was really mad about those cows. He didn't care so much about Watch, but I really cared about Watch. And in our neighborhoods, those dogs still hide. But what really made me think it's not so free is a few years back I went to Hawaii on New Year's Eve, between New Year's or Christmas and New Year's, and I was there on New Year's Eve. And the main street on Waikiki was just filled with hundreds of thousands of people. And they were not all sober. People were driving by in convertibles. And they were throwing out firecrackers. And on the corner that I was at, there was a family with a baby in the stroller. And I saw one of those firecrackers coming out of the convertible, and it dropped into the stroller with the baby in it. Dad saw it too and reached in and grabbed. There were blankets, and then he grabbed the blanket with the firecracker and got it out, and it burst in his hand. But the baby was so scared. There's fun without firecrackers and devices and things going into the air, and maybe they are better than the community activity on a certain day at a certain time, but not always. I'm remembering good times, and I'm going to vote no.
The member from Washington, the author of the bill, Representative Creasel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to thank everyone for the respectful debate today. And I'm just kidding. I didn't know if there's someone after me. I'll sit down, Mr. Speaker. I've said all my points. If there's more people that want to debate, that's fine.
Further discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Representative Garofalo, I think that actually one of the things we're supposed to do is try to strike a balance in legislation. And the legislature probably should be somewhere between the fun police and reckless endangerment of children by drunk adults. And I think it's unfortunate that the Atkins Amendment was not adopted, because, and the opposition to it, I think, really did stand for reckless endangerment of children by drunk adults. I did a quick search, and I'm sure Representative Rukavina doesn't like lawyers in the legislature because we can actually look at statutes. And one of the things that you can do if you look through the statute books and search the term under the influence is find just a few examples of things you're not allowed to do while under the influence with that exact set of terminology. You're not allowed to go hunting under the influence without reference to any kind of blood alcohol standard. You're not allowed to operate a snowmobile under the influence without any particular reference to a blood alcohol standard. Curiously, Representative Creasel, I went down the list and we have something I didn't even know about called the Minnesota Code of Military Justice. You're certainly not allowed to be on your post while under the influence, and that's all it says. So members, we're going to be back here to try to fix this if it passes and becomes law. It's not going to take too many incidences of kids getting badly injured with fireworks, possibly while under the supervision of drunk adults, possibly under no supervision. We're going to come back and fix a lot of these things, and the Atkins amendments would have gone some distance to do that. So, Mr. Speaker, Representative Creasel, and members, we could probably loosen these restrictions up a little bit, but it's unfortunate that we had to stand in opposition to very common sense things. I don't know why having supervision over kids operating fireworks wouldn't be subject to the same under the influence standards that we use for hunting and driving a snowmobile. But apparently that's a great restriction on freedom. And Representative Garofalo, I'm sure you think it's a namby-pamby nanny state that says you can't go hunting while drunk also. But at our deer camp, even if the law didn't say it, we wouldn't do it. But it's still a good idea to have the law. It's still a good idea to set the expectation that hunting and drinking don't mix, just like fireworks and drinking shouldn't mix, especially with kids involved. So it's a shame that you couldn't accept that amendment. It's a shame we didn't have a vote on it. So members, I think when we're striking the balance between the fun police and reckless endangerment of kids by drunk adults, we don't have that right. We're going to come back to fix it. I don't know how people are going to vote, but I think a lot of people, there are going to be people who are injured because we didn't get that balance right for this bill, and I think we should vote no.
Discussion. Further discussion, the member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Winkler, this is not about some of the things you discussed. This is about a difference between whose responsibility is it? Is it the government's responsibility, or is this the family's responsibility to supervise their children? That's what it comes down to. It is about nanny state government. That's what the resistance in Representative Atkins' amendment was. Growing more and more nanny state. Next we're going to tell people they can't drive in their car with their kids if they're smoking. Or we're going to say they can't use a cell phone. Or we're going to say we can't have their dog on the front seat of the car. There's all kinds of ideas that the people who want to take away more and more of our liberties come up with. Now this is a chance for us finally to give some of those back. And Representative Creasel, thank you for your authorship of the bill. Great job.
Further discussion. Further discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 77 ayes and 50 nays, the bill is passed. Its title is agreed to. Calling the member from calling the member from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Pursuant to Rule 1.22, it's my intention to place House File Number 1284 Beard, Senate File 230 Norton, Senate File 1808 Lanning, House File 418 Downey, House File 2685 Beard, House File 2860 Cornish, House File 2967 Holberg, Senate File 1597 Detmer, and House File 1752 Howes on the fiscal calendar for Tuesday, April 24th, 2012.
Calling the member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Speaker, I move the calendar of the day be continued.
Representative Dean moves that the calendar of the day be continued. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails. Motions and resolutions are a copy of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there are no objections, we will take action on these motions first. Hearing no objections, the motions prevail. Announcements. The member from Stearns, Representative Hosh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just an announcement to the body. Come to session tomorrow hungry. We will be doing Johnny Bread Day. And we will be having Johnny Bread with honey butter from the sisters at the monastery at St. Ben's. And we will also be having meat at the meat market. So there will be kind of a breakfast and a lunch session.
Announcements. The member from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The Ways and Means Committee will start at 6:30 p.m. in room 200 in the State Office Building.
Announcements. Seeing no further announcements, the member from Washington, the Majority Leader, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. Tuesday, April 24th, 2012.
Representative Dean moves and the House adjourns today, adjourns until 10 a.m. Tuesday, April 24th, 2012. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails. Representative Dean.
I move the House do now adjourn.
Representative Dean moves the House do now adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Tuesday, April 24th, 2012.